And Ashley Hinson. We overlooked the fact that she's a USC Trojan. Last night, she was on the Select Committee on China, the Communist Party, chaired by Congressman Gallagher. She joins me now. Good morning, Congresswoman. How are you?
Good morning, Hugh. It's great to be with you and doing great, caffeinating.
I have not had a chance yet to thank USC for knocking themselves out of the Final Four and allowing the Ohio State Buckeyes to go. So I was very pleased. I'm glad to see you, and you've recovered from that shock. But now you've got your hopes up again, right?
Yeah, well, we lost to Utah twice. We're not going to let that happen again. So I
All
think
right.
we're definitely looking forward to next year.
Congresswoman, tell us about last night, why you wanted to be on the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, and your points last night about ag land.
Yeah, well, I think when you look at Iowa's relevance in this conversation, Iowa has had its intellectual property stolen. Our workers have suffered as a result of these aggressions and this long appeasement with the Communist Party of China. It's high time we stop appeasing China and high time we start competing with China. And that's why I wanted to be on this committee. And I think what folks saw last night on that hearing was that we have an ideological, a technological, an economic and a military competition with China. I think our witnesses did a great job of telling that story last night. And our committee laid out this truly extensive threat that the CCP really poses to Americans. And then we showed, again, why our previous policy towards China has failed, explored how we got to this point, but also, I think, started touching on the tip of the iceberg where how we're going to present some policy solutions that blueprint for how we move our country forward.
Now, Congresswoman Hinson, it was a 3 hour hearing, which is okay for an opening hearing, and it was bipartisan in the extreme. I don't recall a hearing, actually, that bipartisan. You've been there a few years. What do you think? Is that a high water mark for getting along with the other side in advancement of a common goal?
I believe so. I think this is a committee that's not operating as Republicans or Democrats, but truly as Americans. And I think it was very clear last night with the witness testimony and with what our members were asking on both sides of the aisle. People are serious about solving these challenges that we have with China. It's very clear that the CCP's ultimate goal is to realize that Chinese dream by 2049. That's not lost on our committee, that's the 100th anniversary, obviously, big deal for China. And we need to make sure that we're fighting for the American dream, not the Chinese dream. The Chinese dream is an American nightmare. So we are focused on working together to achieve those policy solutions. And I have no doubt we'll have our differences and we'll have some of those fights in our committee. But I think what you'll see come out of our committee are legitimate policy ideas for our authorizing committees that they can pass and that we can actually implement. Things to make sure we are decoupling in the right way, things to make sure we're funding our military and our defense, as H.R. McMaster talked a lot about last night, things to make sure we're empowering the American workforce, as Scott Paul talked about last night. So we have a lot of work to do going ahead. I think that was, again, just the start of some of the interesting fact finding that we are going to do as a committee over the next few months.
Let's hone in on the ag land issue, Congresswoman, because it's so near and dear to an Iowan like yourself. I don't think a lot of Americans understand what the CCP is doing with agricultural land. Will you enlighten them?
Sure. Well, it's plain and simple. They're being aggressive and have really ramped up their purchases of American farmland. And I think it's twofold. It's number one, they want to, I believe, ultimately undermine our food security. And number two, they want to buy these pieces of land in strategic locations around the country. We saw the paths that the spy balloons took as they floated across our country over our strategic sites. They're doing the exact same thing with these purchases of farmland. For instance, when I was down at the border, probably it's almost 2 years ago now, Laughlin Air Force Base, not too far away there, and we had a chance to stop in, and the Chinese have bought a huge plot of land not far from there where we train our Air Force pilots. That to me seems like blatant espionage, and I think that's exactly the intent of the party. At this point, they are not even hiding some of their aggressions and their brazen provocations toward the United States.
Congresswoman, it's very hard to get people to follow a storyline as complicated as this, but it's a many tentacled monster we're dealing with here. The Chinese Communist Party was running a pseudo police station in Manhattan, and Congressman Gallagher and Congressman Torres went up there and did that. But I didn't know that, and I'm supposed to follow this stuff pretty closely. And Pottinger's a friend, and Pompeo. I didn't know that they did that.
Well, and that's where, Hugh, I'm hopeful that everyone's watching this, right? And I think the Chinese spy balloon really elevated the conversation for Americans about the risk that the CCP does pose to us economically and in terms of our military as well. And I think those, obviously stories were told last night in a very compelling way, not only with those videos, which I think used Xi's own words about his intentions, but also just showcasing the human rights abuses. And, you talk about the domination. They called it, basically a digital prison that these Chinese people are in. The ultimate victims here, if not Americans for the price we've paid, are the Chinese people from the oppression that their government continues to pour down on them every single day.
So are you an optimist, Congresswoman Hinson, about getting people to look up from their TikTok accounts and realize that they are feeding the AI beast that is China while they're also providing a dossier on themselves and on America generally?
Well, I certainly hope that this is starting that educational process. I would like to see TikTok off of everybody's phones because that's just another spy balloon everywhere, 210 million of them across the United States, as far as I'm concerned. We heard last night about how the Chinese Communist Party is using apps like that and WeChat to spy on people, to spy on journalists, and try to reveal their sources and then go after them, retaliate against those people who spoke out. This is where we need to, again, hold them accountable. And the best way to hold them accountable is to cut them off from these avenues of being able to spy on Americans.
My last question, Congresswoman Hinson, the defense budget is always a contentious business. Do you think that this bipartisan committee and the focus on the threat, military threat that General McMaster spelled out last night may lead to some improvements in how we fund the Department of Defense?
Well, I certainly hope so. And I know Speaker McCarthy has been very clear that there are always ways to find savings in defense. And there's a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse we know across the federal government. So we need to be super diligent in hyper-targeting that while making investments where we need to. My colleague Neil Dunn last night on the committee showed some of the ships that we are working on building here in the United States, some of the challenges we have in competing militarily in terms of our Navy. That's an area where I see we need serious investment, energetics, the things that make our military weapons go boom. We're far behind on our production of those. China has been ramping up production. So that's where I see a need for critical investment right now. And then you talk about what we need to be doing. We also need to be defending our sovereign ally, Taiwan. I think defending them will be the best deterrent against an invasion or attack by China.
Bonus question, Congresswoman, because I have a little bit more time. In terms of the amount of homework you have to do for this committee, I mean, it does seem to me like you're drinking from a fire hose. What's it been like?
It has. It's a lot of incoming, Hugh. And I think what I have tried to do, especially over the last few weeks, is just do a lot of reading. A lot of reading about why President Xi thinks the way he does. A lot of reading about how the Chinese Communist Party became so powerful, how they oppress their people, learning about the human rights abuses that are being perpetrated, and also the complacency of American companies in that as well. How we're going to better enforce our laws going forward with teeth in them so that the Chinese actually comply. So that's the way I'm kind of, the filter I'm putting on as I'm trying to learn more and also figure out the best policy solutions going forward. And our team has been working around the clock to prepare for last night. And trust me, we have a long laundry list of ideas coming out of that hearing.
Congresswoman Ashley Hinson, thank you for joining me. Keep coming back. Keep doing the great work on the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party engagement because it matters so much. We're advancing the learning curve of the United States, and you're doing a great job. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Hugh.